Hello and welcome to Too Long Didn't Read, the only weekly show with expert views on the latest housing market news, the best social media content, and a joke-telling potato. Now here's your hosts, Randy Shiozaki and Scott Brickson.
Hello, agentpreneurs, and welcome to this week's episode of TLDR. I'm Randy.
And I'm Scott.
And we're trying to get much better at that. And welcome to today's show. Today, we got a really good lineup. We're going to talk about pocket listings, tax credits, cloffices, sweat rooms, and more. And we're going to end with home price predictions. So lots of good stuff this week, Scott, right? All of this content comes from your daily email, the daily list report. It's in your inbox every day. You've got notables at the top to stay on top of the industry. We pull from the best of the best of the best, and we cover those stories in depth here. All right, Scott, actually, I'm starting today, and we're starting with pocket listings. Really popular story in the daily list report last week, and it was all about pocket listings. This is a sensitive topic, right? This is something that all of us wrestle with. There is clear guidelines against doing this. This is the clear cooperation policy from NAR, which is only about a year old. What's interesting about that is that it came about right at the beginning of the pandemic and frankly, a very hot market. Now, this article on Real Trends was written by Rogers Healy. He's the founder and CEO of Rogers Healy and Associates, which is actually ranked as one of the nation's best real estate brokerages by Real Trends specifically. What's interesting is he makes some arguments here as to how and why he's still using pocket listings, though claims to use them, of course, in a fair and legal manner. So basically what he's arguing is there's 4 key reasons why a client would choose to go with a pocket listing. Now, he's calling them whisper listings, which, Scott, I think is kind of funny, right? It's like, I don't know, call a spade, I don't know. He says there's 4 reasons. One is sellers don't need to sell. So if a seller doesn't need to sell, that's a good reason for a whisper listing. If you're in a market that's as strong as it is now, right, it's the one thing that's going to make your house stand out, right? People want things that they can't have or that aren't widely advertised. Number 3, sellers are private people. So we see these things with celebrities and, prominent business people, though it is not limited to that, but that is a reason to want to do this. And number 4 is that sellers want to sell at a selling point that isn't realistic. This is sort of like, Scott, I think of it as the make me move on Zillow, right? You put some ridiculous price there and you're like, look, if you want to pay me an outsized number, sure, I'll take it. Never mind how the appraisal is going to turn out. So I'm really curious, Scott, to hear from all of our audience right now, how you're wrestling with this, how you're dealing with this, right? Ostensibly, all of these guidelines are in place to protect the consumer and to protect the agent. A lot of states now have banned dual agency, so you can't represent both sides of the deals. In the states that haven't, you have to be really careful, right? Because who is your fiduciary duty to if you're representing both sides? And basically, you have to make sure that you sign particular agreements so that they have an understanding, all right, of whose interests are being sort of looked after here. So I'm curious to see how all of you are dealing with this. Is it something that is a topic of conversation? Are you seeing this? Are there ways, legal ways around this? And this is what Rogers is arguing here. For example, promoting, Scott, listings to their private Facebook group, right? And in fact, he's claiming that there's a loophole in this policy, and in particular in this hot market that people are taking advantage of, which is you can accept an offer before a listing goes live, right? You can't schedule a showing, but you can accept an offer. And in this market, people are submitting offers blind. And so it's a really interesting time to discuss and wrestle with this topic. So curious to hear what all of you think about this. Please put comments below. And of course, while you're putting that comment below, hit that subscribe button and click that little bell so you don't miss any more of these episodes. All right, Scott, next up is tax credits. It's a classic, Scott. It is an absolute classic. And I'm afraid that my kids don't know that, unfortunately. That's a failing. Scott, you're on mute. You're just a Bill, but you're a Bill on mute right now. There you go.
There we go. I am Mr. Technical Difficulties. Yeah. Do you still know the words to all these songs? I do.
If you wanna sing them, Scott, I will sit back and I will enjoy.
Okay, so just a quick one. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about a home buyer's down payment grant, right? Grant meaning if you qualify for the money, you get it and you don't need to pay it back. Another piece of legislation has been introduced into Congress by a Democrat. It's for a $15,000, max $15,000 tax credit. Now, in all of the stories that I've read, it's pretty well defined that this is really for, kind of lower middle income folks who have not bought a home before and are buying a home that's not, expensive for the area. So it's pretty ring fenced in terms of the number of people who this will be available to.
Yes.
I just want to point this out. It's been introduced, and in the 2 or 3 articles that I've read, it sounds very likely that both this credit and the grant to help with down payments could be passed by Congress. So, to the extent that you have clients that these might be available, these funds might be available to, or these tax credits might be available to, make sure you help them out by passing these stories along. And on that note, I want to let you know a little sneak peek. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be introducing something really cool in our daily email, which is basically we're going to allow you to share our notable stories.
Yes.
With the summaries that I write, using the same shareables format that you guys love. When you see it, I think you're going to love it, and you'll recognize immediately how it can be used. So you can take a story that you like and immediately share it on Facebook. It's got a great, really cool backdrop. You can add your own perspective so that clients know why you're sending this to them and generate reactions that way, and also just appear authoritative. Yeah, that's it for this on this tax credit, and also upcoming notables that are shareable.
That's going to be really cool, Scott. I mean, they're so popular. I cannot wait to see all of you out there start to share these stories. And as Scott said, you can put your own little spin on it, your own little bit of commentary on it. All right, next up, we are talking about, one second here. There we go. Got some screen share up here. A really cool story from realtor.com. And, this is talking about some of the trends that we've seen emerge over the last year. And I think this is really important because if you go through this list, and we're going to go through some of these right now, it really helps you understand how to be creative when you're showing homes, right? So when you're showing a home to a potential buyer, you can look at it sort of through this lens. And these things may not all be appropriate to you. Wait till we get to cloffices. But these are the trends that are happening. So number one is real home offices. No question there, right? People are working from home more than ever, and they need a place to actually set up and work. This one I think is really interesting for people with smaller spaces, and this is the rise of the cloffice. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of creativity. If you look at this shot here and you look at what they did, Scott, that's pretty remarkable, right? They took the downstairs closet and they turned it into, I think, a pretty compelling and quite nicely looking little office where you can get your work done and you can do your Zoom calls. And so again, this allows you, when you're showing homes or looking at properties, to be able to use your imagination, knowing some of the trends that are out there. Let's go to a couple more. Number 3 is victory gardens. People are home more than they have been before. People who wanted to garden weren't able to do that. So if you think about this, even from a home renovation perspective and putting garden boxes in the back, or if you're in this place in an urban area, right, where you can put one on a beautiful terrace, that's been a huge trend. Number 4, and I can attest to this because I see this across my teams, the indoor plant craze. Scott, I got people on my team who could barely pronounce the word rose or recognize a rose, right? Who now could probably name half of the species within this image right here. It's pretty remarkable. And this has become a fairly high-end game because people want to bring a little bit of the outdoors indoors. This one I thought was really fascinating. This is closing off open floor plans, right? For years now, we've been wanting open floor plans and everybody can just wander around and do their thing and it's a nice big space, but now you're working and you frankly don't want your spouse, your partner, your kids right next to you all day long. So closing that off, creating doors. And again, you can think about how to be creative in using big space and how to break that space up with partitions or actual installation of doors, windows, things like that. Of course, supersized outdoor spaces are high on everyone's list. We're still hanging out at home. What's interesting right now, Scott, is that I'm talking to people who are starting to get out more and they're like, I'm exhausted. I just want to go home and rest, right? So we're seeing the pendulum switch to the other side. Of course, kitchen's big. We're cooking more than ever before. Dedicated sweat areas. This one's fantastic. I converted a downstairs bedroom into a gym during this time because you need a space to be able to work out and to relax. Hands-free everything, right? So if you look at upgrades in the home, this makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of these things, Scott, we're still not going to get away from. I'm still using hand sanitizer 10 times a day. It's just a habit now, quite frankly. I'm putting my foot in the door when I'm going into places and not grabbing the handle. These are just things that are rational or otherwise. They're just habits now, right? So anything that prioritizes cleanliness, safety, things like that is huge. And this one is really fun. Number 10, choosing the DIY route over the in-person professional help. People are still having people come in and do work for them, but more than ever, people are taking it upon themselves to do some of that work. And so I think when you're talking to potential buyers and you're looking at this from the angle of a fixer-upper or home improvements, I think it's important to recognize that a lot of people now want to do this stuff themselves. So again, staying on top of these trends is really important. All of these links are below to these stories, so you can click on them and soon to be able to share them in the daily email. All right, Scott, you're up next with home price predictions, and this is a really good one.
Yeah, Randy, before I go to that story, have you used any of these hand sanitizers that smell exactly like tequila?
No, are you sure you're using hand sanitizer and not actual?
No, it's not on purpose. It's legit hand sanitizer, but the alcohol that they use for it smells exactly like tequila. And so yesterday at 10 o'clock, my mom asked me if I'd already had a margarita. No, I'm protecting you.
Well, wasn't there, rewind the clock a year, Scott, wasn't there a whole thing about when there was a hand sanitizer shortage about using Tito's tequila? Like you somehow use Tito's and something to make hand sanitizer. And people are like, it's not the same thing, but maybe that's where it came from.
Yep. Hey, so I wanted to share this graph with you, and I made the title of the notable somewhat controversial. I said, Americans are terrible at predicting home prices. And I realized that some of you may have been confused about what I was saying there. It was a Gallup poll that surveys people, I think, every 6 months about whether they think home prices are going to go up or down in the next 12 months. Okay. And the graph that you see, whoops, let's go this way.
There you go. You got
no, you don't want to see my bald head. So on the left side, where it says 70, that means that just before the Great Recession, just before housing prices crashed, 70% of Americans expected home prices would rise in the next 12 months, right? Now let's fast forward to 2009, when we were about ready to start a very, very long but somewhat slow recovery. Only 22% of Americans thought home prices would rise, okay? Now let's fast forward to pre-pandemic. You see that 62 just before the final kink in the graph? So, in January of 2020, 2/3 of Americans thought home prices would rise for the next year. Who could have predicted the pandemic, right? We can't blame us.
Yeah.
A couple months later, 40% said that they would rise. Now, here we are again. 70% of Americans now believe that home prices will rise over the next 12 months. And they're probably right. But the point I want to make with this graph is that, in some cases, there is a genius to crowds. But when it comes to predicting turning points in graphs, large groups of people are notoriously terrible at predicting that. So I wasn't trying to suggest that the 71% means that we're going to have a housing crash. It's just that whenever Americans as a group are this confident, you do have to be a little bit skeptical.
Right. Really, really good point. And, to your previous point, Scott, all of the data, all of the conversations that I've had, right, and you've had, frankly, with people in this industry, there you go, would suggest that home prices are not going to go down because the demand is real, and a lot of the safety, a lot of the protections that were put in place after the 2008 crash, these are real buyers with real money, with record equity, right? And so this is a real market. And now there is a breaking point. Prices can't appreciate 30% every year. It will simply be unaffordable, and it's already affordable for a lot of Americans today. But I think the predictions right now are about a 7% annual increase year over year, which is still, frankly, quite healthy, right, on an asset that large. But certainly not in the 30% numbers. Now, Scott, one thing I do want to point out in that article that I thought was interesting is that there is this sort of dichotomy, right, where people are bullish on the asset class of a home as compared to stocks, bonds, whatever, right? Although stocks are quite high, we're in a good market, but they also don't feel like it's a good time to buy a home. So you don't really feel good about the purchase because it's so expensive. And I just thought that was an interesting thing for all of you watching right now that people are wrestling with. They're like, I should buy, I know it's going to go up, but I don't feel good about buying right now.
Yeah. And it's not surprising considering how much prices have moved up, and for some people who've been trying to buy a home and keep losing. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Scott, that's our show for today. So we're going to finish this with, well, I'm going to out my co-founder and CEO of this company because TikTok has become his favorite pastime, Scott. I don't know if you know this, but man, this guy's got downtime. He's on the TikToks. So we're going to share a TikTok with you, housing related one right now. So that's it for today. We'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, folks.
We